From the Z. Alexander Luby Center Theater, in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Just Conversations, presented by the Metro Human Relations Commission.
Welcome to this Just Conversations episode on language access, being filmed at the Z. Luby Theater here in Nashville. I'm your host, Luis Pedraza with the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, a nonprofit organization focused on the advocacy of our immigrant and refugee communities across Tennessee. I'll let our panelists today introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Becca Blank, and I'm with Voces de Nashville, a cooperative of women who are teaching Spanish to adults around the Nashville community.
And my name is Lydia Yousief. I'm the director of Mahabba Center in South Nashville, serving the Arabic-speaking communities in the greater Nashville area. We have 12 direct programs and 2 campaigns currently.
Thank you both. Thank you both for being here today. And today, as I mentioned, we're talking about language accessibility issues here in Nashville. And to start, in 2009, Nashville council members had attempted to pass an English-only bill, as you both know, which failed, thanks to the community organizing around against it. But it did spark the conversation about how important language accessibility truly is here in the city. We're going on 15 years now since that bill failed, and we have to ask the question, is Nashville a place that truly celebrates diversity when it comes to language accessibility? We tackle that in today's today's conversation. And I want to start with you, Becca. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved in the issue of language accessibility.
Yeah, so I came to this issue through the lens of a teacher. I taught in Metro schools in South Nashville and also served as a Spanish language interpreter. And so I saw firsthand the need for more language support in schools, more interpretation, the lack of access to certain resources that families and students have when there is not interpretation available. So it's something that I became quickly very passionate about.
You, Lydia?
So I grew up in Nashville, and even though I was born here, my parents are from Egypt. So I grew up as a child of immigrants, which means you're translating at the doctor's office, you're translating at the mall, saying this is the coupon that mom wants to use from a very young age all the way through adulthood. But my parents are both bilingual, so I had not experienced kind of the severity of language access, just kind of people who are very, I can't understand your accent, or people who are very dismissive and disrespectful to my parents constantly. When I became a Sunday school teacher in the Coptic churches here, I would see children who were really going through it in terms of language access here in Nashville. So they would be pulled out of school to go to the doctor's office with their parents to translate because the doctor's office did not have an interpreter. So they had to describe their parents' pain as a 12-year-old to a doctor. I had kids ask me, what is a resume? How do we make one? Where can I find a template? Can you help me? To help their parents apply for jobs. So it was very important to me when we started in Mahabba in 2019 that we really took an effort to make sure language accessibility was at the heart of our organization. So, and that we practiced the ideals of what language access was within our organization. So, and Mahabba's website is human translated instead of Google translated, both into Arabic and English. We translate most of our information, especially on Facebook, into Arabic as well to make sure we are bridging the gap for our community in terms of information resources.
That's good. Yeah, I remember growing up, my parents came here in the 90s. I'm the son of two immigrant parents. And in the school system and just being out and about, it was so difficult to find any type of translation in those days. And now it's increased.
Right.
But there's still places where we could better that access. Becca, from your perspective, what are some areas or what is the current state of language accessibility here in Nashville?
Yeah, I think my primary lens is, again, through Metro schools. And I think there are a lot of efforts going into improving language access, but the scale and scope is just not where it needs to be. There are interpreters that are highly trained and very much ingrained in communities, interpreters that have been at schools for 10 plus years. But there needs to be an effort to expand the amount of interpreters we have. Some schools share interpreters. There just aren't enough, and there are those language lines and things like that. But whenever you don't have that human interaction, the quality decreases significantly, and we need more people in our schools who have the ability to work with students and families. And I imagine in other areas across Metro as well.
Are there examples of schools that maybe have done a lot more to address that language accessibility issues? Any schools that are recently had more of a non-English speaking population attend their schools?
Yeah, there are a lot of schools that are seeing an increase in Spanish-speaking populations, especially like in West Nashville, and there are a lot of teachers who are concerned about building their own Spanish-speaking capacity, as well as getting more interpretation in the school. But there's just not enough, even at the where there are high populations of Spanish speakers, for example. At a school that I taught in South Nashville, they had designated one interpreter and were able to hire a second only because of COVID relief funding available in the past few years. I'm not sure if they've been able to sustain that second interpreter. But even with two interpreters, the level of need was far more than what those two people could handle. And that led to incidents where students weren't getting the attention they need medically. The nurse was on the line waiting 20 minutes for a dial-in interpreter to handle a student who had acute medical needs, or even with issues of discipline. We saw after the pandemic, just student behavior changed a lot and teachers weren't sure how to respond. And there were more discipline cases. And a lot of times if students don't have their ability to communicate what's going on in their first language, there are a lot of assumptions that get made by administrators. And there was an example with one student who was accused of bringing, a Spanish-speaking student accused of bringing a knife to school, unidentified pills, and a vape pen. And because the student couldn't explain herself, the administration immediately started writing up a tobacco citation, taking it very seriously, as one should if those things are true. But once I called the parent and was able to speak with them in Spanish, it was clarified that the knife was for cutting fruit, and that wasn't something that was intended or to be harmful, or there were the pills, for example, were for pain the student was having, and the mom didn't know the proper procedures for reporting that and giving it to the nurse. So just a ton of misunderstanding that can happen if there aren't real people in the building to intercept and support.
And I believe you had told me that what they had thought was some sort of vape device actually had been some type of toy.
Right. It was a toy
that a bunch of the students have been passing around.
Exactly. And because the student wasn't confident in talking to the monolingual English-speaking administrator, that misinterpretation happened.
And I mean, that's such an important thing to understand, is that people could not just face barriers, but could get in trouble because of that simple misunderstanding.
Right.
For you, Lydia, what have you seen in the community when it comes to not just community organizations or in the school, but maybe our local government? Where are the improvements or the regression that we're seeing?
There's a lot that can be done in Nashville. I think Nashville assumes that it's a very progressive city and that it's a very welcoming city for immigrants, and parades itself with cultural fests and such. But the actual structural needs that first and second gen and just in general people of color need in this city are not being met. So within Metro Council, if you go to a Metro Council meeting, there are no interpreters, human interpreters there present. They have on their little TV telegram thing the transcript in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, but I can already tell that it's pretty delayed based on what's being said in council. And so the impact that that has on our communities is, if they even show up to a council meeting, noting that the agenda is not translated, that there is no human interpreter available on site, They come in and they're expected to receive a delayed interpretation of what's going on, which automatically tells people, you know, we don't care that you know what's going on in real time. This is your second class citizen. Just for your info, here's a really bad translation that's delayed as well. And that is not something that a welcoming city should consider as a bare minimum even. So it's very disappointing. We even have like Metro School Board that now has refused to have interpretation at meetings. When you go to fill out the little application to do a public comment, you can't even request an interpreter. So all of that between like language interpretation is by request or kind of a secondary thought for people automatically is very undemocratic to thousands and thousands of people who don't know what's going on, but they have issues just like all of us with traffic. They have issues at work and wages. They have issues at the school that they can't they don't know where to bring it to, and the government is slowly taking that kind of knowledge away from them as well by not translating. So to me, translation is the essence of democracy, especially when you have tens of thousands in the city. I've even seen, like with Metro schools, I've had people tell me that in order for them to understand what's going on, especially with Arabic, because Google Translate is what's being used, they will receive the little memo. They will translate it into Google Translate into English, see what it says in English, and then translate to their parents back into an Arabic that's understandable. I've even heard Kurdish community members who've said, just give us the English. We don't want you to even attempt a translation because it's so abysmal. So that's what we're dealing with in this city. We're talking about immigrants going the extra length to just try to understand something as basic as, is school closed today? What's going on with my child? Where do I go if there's a wage theft case? Where do I go if there's a traffic problem in my neighborhood? Who is my council member? When are they doing their meetings? So just rudimentary democratic procedures are being lost.
So I think that goes also to what are the better forms of engagement our local government and our community organizations that they can have with our community. Becca, where do you see some of the lower hanging fruit or some of the obvious steps that the community could take first?
Yeah, I think this is something that Lydia and I have talked about, is making sure that you are gathering people from the community to fulfill those vital roles of interpretation, because not only do they know the language, but the cultural context behind the people that we are trying to reach. And so I think it's really important to, one, recruit and retain people from the right places who can actually provide quality interpretation and quality facilitate quality interactions and connection, and then also just paying those people well and recognizing the just immense value that bilingual people bring to our community. Because if one person is Spanish speaking and has an idea for something that could help our whole school system, that helps all children, not just children who come from households where other languages are spoken. So I think we've got to invest in our people.
Yeah.
And I know that certification is something that the city is always focusing on. Lydia, I think you've mentioned it to me before. Certification could be maybe a barrier to entry when it comes to our communities being able to be there for one another.
Right.
What are some of your thoughts on certification within the city?
Yeah, I definitely see, it's very disappointing when there are jobs that are like, you have to be certified in Arabic to help with like job applications or to help with something as simple as like a tin care application. And I think that there are some organizations that are coming to realize that it's not a useful framework. It can be useful in a doctor's office because you need to know medical terms in order to fully describe to somebody what's going on, or in a court where legal terms are super important. Certification is something definitely that someone should know for both of those tasks. But for something as simple as I'm working at a nonprofit and filling out SNAP applications or helping people apply for jobs, that definitely can be from the community, built by the community. Also, the cultural competency is extremely, extremely real, and that goes hand in hand with the language barrier. So I do think we need to move beyond Google Translate. We have a lot of nonprofits that translate things with like basic flyers in Google Translate, and for Arabic, it's not a good tool. And what happens is community members see that and they automatically feel uninvited. They automatically feel this is somebody who they're not going to have someone who speaks Arabic, because if they can't translate a flyer, who am I going to talk to there, right? Even if it's like a lot of resources, like a health fair or a community event where they're getting to know council members. So something as basic as just if we could think about language access as something integral to everything we're doing in Nashville, as opposed to something secondary. So I have a lot of people who send me flyers and PowerPoints, and they're like, translate into Arabic in 2 days, and we'll see what we're going to do about it. And that's not a way to engage language access. It's not something secondary. It's not something quick. And when you do it like that, obviously, I had somebody who wanted to do something similar, like a whole community event, something informational on government, and sent it to me just a couple days before. And I said, that's not going to work with us because you need a full setup to welcome community members. It's not something secondary that we should be thinking about. So changing the culture around how we see our immigrant community members, and actually developing a system of welcoming, as opposed to you guys just figure it out, come as you are into our events, and seeing what we're doing as something non-welcoming and how we can fix that. We're the problem, not community members.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
And pivoting just a little bit, earlier in the year, we did have a mayor's race, as both know, and it was populated with many candidates. And there was a forum, the largest, if not one of the largest forums, that was immigrant and refugee community oriented. And many of the candidates were asked, all the candidates were asked, would you commit to, as mayor, funneling $5 million, or around $5 million, strictly to the immigrant and refugee community so it can invest in our communities? And all but one of the candidates said yes. And now the current mayor, Freddie O'Connell, was one of the candidates who did say yes. What are some of the things that you think could immediately be tackled by this mayor's office when considering funneling that money and making sure that our communities receive the benefits and actually thrive in the community? Becca?
Yeah. I was just thinking as you were talking about that, about this principle of universal design that is actually in metro schools. It's a big push right now for teachers to design their lessons universally so that all students benefit, no matter what learning disability you might be coming in, no matter what language you might be coming in with. And just thinking about how do we design our city's infrastructure so that it's accessible to all people. And that only facilitates a deeper level of connection and community among all people. And so thinking about, for example, the bus system, that has a huge impact. The fact that we don't have public transportation on our immigrant communities, especially if they're waiting on getting their driver's license, which I know Lydia's done a ton of work in that area, getting Arabic speaking or Arabic language driving materials and driver's license materials. And so, but thinking in the meantime, how do we welcome people? We've got to build that infrastructure, and we've got to build it in a way that they can immediately access it, because increasing or putting money into our transportation system, and this is one example, right? And making it both language accessible and expanding the routes, all of that's universal design where everyone benefits and everyone can have a greater access.
Lydia, what are some of your thoughts of what maybe the mayor's office could start tackling?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think having language access impacts every other department of Metro. So I think that it really should be incumbent upon the mayor's office to start to set a standard, because this is sadly a very new conversation in Nashville about language access and what that means. So I think setting a standard for pay rates for things that need certification, things that don't, and where to get that certification. not using Google Translate or any machine, and access to interpretation language co-ops such as ourselves. So I think setting a standard first is really important coming out of the mayor's office, and having a standard for every department to translate and grants and funding for that. To me, this should be very integral already to the government. So I hesitate to say grants and funding already, because we pay taxes. All immigrants pay taxes because we don't have a state income tax. So we pay sales taxes every day. We pay property taxes every year. So it should be an integral part of every department at Metro already. And I think the mayor's office needs to be deliberate about that and setting the standard so that every department is meeting that standard, and not just saying, well, language access is that in MNPS we have one office doing it for 150 languages. And I think we also have to be really honest that Nashville has a long way to go. So we've for a long time have said we have 150 languages in MNPS, and we have all these cultural fests, and we love diverse Nashville. But we have to be honest about what is happening on the ground in Nashville. And it's not just we need the trash pickup, or we need people to stay here. We need people who feel welcomed, who feel like this is my city, this is a city I'm investing in, from everyone in South Nashville.
Mhm. Thank you both. We are running a little short on time, so I wanted to gather your final thoughts. What does solving language accessibility issues here in the city mean to you all? How would that look like for our communities, and what doors would it open up for our communities? Becca.
I think we have to understand that solving language accessibility means solving so many issues that affect all people. Because if we improve language accessibility for some of these key services, that means we're investing more time and more thought into services that serve everyone, from public transportation to housing to our education system. And I think we really just need that cultural shift of seeing more access just means a greater quality of all public goods and services. And language access is just such a huge one, the way that our demographics are shifting in this city, and who our people are, who Nashvillians are.
And I believe you had mentioned as well beforehand in a previous conversation that there's so many people who are ready and willing to be engaged in the community and just be there for one another. But because of that language issue, that language accessibility issue, it becomes a lot harder for folks to be able to engage. And that would be one thing that we would really see rise in the community, is folks who are wanting to be there for their neighbors and be there and be a part of the community. Lydia, what are some of your final thoughts when it comes to what solving this issue would mean?
Yeah, I think on a structural level, I really think we're starting on the first base of setting a standard coming from the mayor's office about what, nonprofits that are working for all the city should not be reliant on like bilingual interpreters, bilingual interns to just go around for free and translate, on cases of domestic violence, or to work on immigration cases, or go to the courts with people. So there should be a standard of saying this needs to be integral to your nonprofit if you're going to take like a state grant, for instance. So I would love to see that more aggressively coming out of the mayor's office. But I also totally agree with you, Becca, that there needs to be a cultural shift in Nashville to see language access as something integral, and also not something as like, oh, these first generation um, people, that's what they need, or it's like a handicap, or some type of um, setback for people. It's not a setback to be bilingual. We know this because we have schools in Nashville that teach Spanish from a very early age, and they teach Chinese at Julia Green out in West Nashville. So bilingualism is something good if you're white. It's something bad if you're not. And we want to encourage our children of color, especially because language is so intricately linked to culture, that it's not something eventually you'll learn English, or to erase a language and a culture through English. That should not be the goal of the government. That should not be the goal of nonprofits. And it should be something that we see as something that is beautiful within our communities of color here in South Nashville and also in the greater Nashville area, that we should be encouraging children to be bilingual. We should be encouraging parents to be bilingual as well. And I think language access then has those implications across the city, that Arabic is not a dirty language. You can speak Arabic openly and not be called a terrorist. You can speak Arabic at the Metro Council meetings and be understood. I once had an interpreter actually in Rutherford County on a case where a Coptic child, an Egyptian child, was being incarcerated and wrongfully. And so the judge refused to have an interpreter in the room. And so the interpreter started speaking in Arabic. And he said, "I'm not going to have that in my court." He grew very angry. And so, and she said, "See how that feels when you don't understand what we're saying? Do you see how that hinders you from doing your job?" And I love that example of feeling like just take a moment to realize what it feels like to be the 12-year-old who has to go to the doctor's office. Take a minute to understand the parent who has an issue and is like, "I don't even know where to begin about these speed bumps." And think about the mental health issue that causes for so many people. For me, the last thing I'll say is that language access is like the seatbelt in the car. It can help mitigate a lot of harmful things that could happen to immigrants and not just to the individual, but to the community when that harm happens to an individual. So we need to treat it as something integral to when every time we're driving, there's language access, not just for immigrants, but that we also shoulder that for people. I don't speak Spanish, but I would love to see Spanish interpretation everywhere I go and to learn Spanish as well, right? And I'm sure people feel the same way about Arabic, to be able to speak to their community members as well.
Thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate it. It's a great conversation. I also wanted to thank the Z. Alexander Luby Center for hosting us today. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Just Conversations. And for more episodes, you can go to www.justconversations.org.